Myself, there I go. Hi, I'll introduce myself very quickly. I'm Vicki Timko. I work at State Support Team Region 2, and joining and helping out Olivia today. So I'll try to watch that chat box if you want to type in it, but I'm sure Olivia will let you know that it's pretty casual and you can unmute and jump in as well. And I apologize, my cheaters have a terrible reflection, but hi, Vicki Timko. Good to meet you guys.
All right. And my name's Olivia Weisman. I am the Literacy and Family Engagement Consultant here at the ESC of Lorain County and State Support Team Region 2. At the bottom here, you'll also see the tiny URL typed at the bottom of the first page of the slides, but I also put it in the chat box so you have that access. And yes, please, it is casual. At any point in time, unmute, pipe in, ask a question. You can also do chat. It is either way you're comfortable because I'll be going pretty quickly to get through all the material, but I definitely want to hear questions. All right, so today what we're going to be working on is making sure that everyone, the goals for today, what I want you to be able to go away with is to be able to name the 5 big ideas of literacy and why they're important. And also we're going to talk about the 5 big ideas of adolescent literacy and be able to talk about those. This, if you have not seen it, is the state strategic plan. I share this at the beginning of everything because all of our work is encompassed around this. And as you can see, it has kind of the nest in the middle that this is focused on the whole child. And literacy shows up in here in 2 areas, in one of the 4 learning domains, under foundational knowledge and skills, and also under the 10 priority strategies. We know that literacy is a lever towards improvement for students. And if you have had the opportunity to see Dr. Stephen Dykstra, he's a psychiatrist in Wisconsin, and he has spoken, he's very passionate about literacy. He works with children who've experienced trauma, and he is very passionate that one of the things that you can give a child who's experienced trauma is the ability to read. Trauma, unfortunately, will be something that they will be dealing with throughout their life. It's ongoing. But if you give them the power to read, you open up an access for them, the ability to get beyond their circumstances and how important that is. He's very powerful if you ever get the chance to see him, of how he shares it and how to get through to kids. It's amazing. There we go. This is the updated state plan to raise literacy achievement. It was just updated last week. So if you haven't read this document, I highly recommend it. This is the work that we're doing as a state, where we want all of our districts to be coming in with us and aligning with the science of reading. The last webinar that we hosted was on the science of reading for about an hour. And this is kind of like the next step of going a little deeper, talking about the 5 big ideas. It's a really great plan, lots of visuals. You will see some of them today, but I would go through that. It's 51 pages long, but it's not too horrible to read, I promise. All right, a little review, I was gonna say, for those of you, oh yes, there's some of you on here who know this, to participate in the simple view of reading. So those of you who have been with me before or have experienced it in other places, who would like to give a try to explain the simple view of reading for me? Bueller, I don't want to voluntold anybody, but no takers?
Olivia, I can represent for Youngstown City Schools.
Wonderful, thank you.
So we know that reading comprehension is the end result or the product. And in order for kids to have grade level reading comprehension, they have to have word decoding skills as well as language awareness skills. And we use it as a a times problem. There we go.
It's the end of the day. I get it.
Because we know that anything times 0 is 0. And so students really need to have both of these areas in order to have reading comprehension.
Exactly. Thank you. Very well said. So, and to go on with that a little bit, you'll see it there, but like she said, anything times 0 is going to equal 0. That's the important factor to notice about the simple view of reading. It is multiplication. It is not addition. So word recognition are those skills like phonemic awareness, the decoding skills, and sight recognition. And when we say sight recognition, we don't mean high frequency words or sight words, but the ability to read words by sight. They're so automatic and accurate that they just read them automatically, okay? And language comprehension is looking at the piece like vocabulary, background knowledge, literary knowledge, understanding of syntax, semantics, all those layers of language that come into our understanding. And reading comprehension is the product of the word recognition times language comprehension. We have to have both sides of that. And as I always say, in an ideal world, our students have both of those, and 1 times 1 equals 1. But we also have our students who struggle with word recognition and may not be able to read the text given to them. Yet they have a fantastic oral language. They're able to have conversations with us. They know lots of words and have vocabulary that is extensive, can speak about texts with us that we've read. But again, 0 times 1 equals 0. So they still don't have reading comprehension. We also have some students that are able to read. We say they're hyperlexic. They can read anything put in front of them fluently. But unfortunately, in the language skills, they don't have that vocabulary, that understanding of syntax and semantics, and they struggle that. And again, 1 times 0 is 0. I see a chat there. Oh, the doctor is, I'll type it in there. Dr. Stephen Dykstra. So again, 1 times 0 equals 0. The students that, oops, I pushed the wrong, there we go, that tend to struggle, that have that strong reading, but that poor language comprehension, these may be some of our students who are on the spectrum, is an area that we see them struggle. More frequently, I tend to think the students that we see struggling have some of that word recognition. They're able to read some of the words and manipulate sounds, but they're not at 97% accuracy that we'd like them to be. So they're still struggling with reading, and they have some vocabulary, background knowledge, some of that, but it's not as strong as we need it to be. We're still trying to build up their background knowledge to get them to understand the things that we're reading and discussing. But 0.5 times 0.5 is only 0.25. So that means they're only comprehending 25% of what they're reading. And I'm sure that you guys would all agree with me that 25% is just not acceptable. They're not going to be able to function with that little comprehension. So it's very important that we acknowledge and notice both sides of the simple view of reading. And as we go through the big 5 ideas, I hope that you'll see how they link up to these skills and relate to what we should be instructing. So I said that you would see some of the visuals from the state plan. This is the language and literacy development continuum. So this moves from birth to adolescence. So birth to grade 12 is what it's looking at, literacy skills. This is a very helpful tool, and this visual is updated. I literally updated it yesterday from the state plan of what it looks like to go from those grades. Now, what's important is our kids may not fall according to their age in a certain area, but we look at their skills and where are they at. This is helpful to then know, like, what questions do I ask if a child's excelling and I need to move them forward? I might not know the questions to ask of what the next steps would be. This could help with that. Or more often, if we have students that are in the adolescent grades, middle and upper grades, and they're struggling, what are the questions and areas that I need to go back to work on instructionally to help build them up so that they're confident and fluent readers? All right, why do we need to know the 5 big ideas of literacy? So it's a very important thing. So National Reading Panel was formed in '97 by Congress because they saw the need to bring together some experts to analyze the bodies of research that we had out there to figure out what are the best, most impactful strategies and practices that will help our students grow to be literate participants. So they formed in '97. In 2000, they printed the report. The report identified the 5 pillars of literacy. It's what some refer to it. I refer to it as the 5 big ideas of literacy. You can see it written in different contexts, slightly differently in places. But they're the 5 components that need to be taught every day in every classroom, especially when we're talking like K to 4 or 5. It's essential these are taught every day. So some considerations. So Timothy Shanahan is someone that we talk about a lot as a state in his pathways to literacy, and considerations that we need to think about when we're working on instruction in our buildings. And one of the first part is that we have a literacy block that is 90 to 120 minutes of literacy. I think a lot probably have about 90 minutes, but to get to 120 minutes would be the ideal place to be. Now, someone asked earlier today, does that include writing? He actually recommends that writing would be on top of that. Now, at primary grades, I think writing is also very interweaved with what you're teaching. So sometimes it's, if you're working more on that composition piece, you would do that outside of that time as well. The other big piece to that is prioritizing that literacy instruction. It should be held sacred. So if you're doing any kind of, what are they called? When people come in and they, so you can tell it's the end of the day. Guest speakers or something like that. Someone's coming up with the words for me.
A craft, assemblies.
A craft and assembly. Assembly, thank you.
Thank you.
Assembly, you want to have that outside of that time because you need to prioritize that literacy instruction. We know that if they have strong literacy skills, they will be able to apply it through math and all their other subject areas. So we must prioritize that, especially in those primary grades. Instruction should be explicit, systematic, and sequential. So I don't know how many of you have spent time reading the 3rd grade reading guarantee, but if you look in that, a lot of these words show up throughout that 3rd grade reading guarantee. And that is because they align with the science of reading. And we know that throughout our instruction, we need to focus on the big ideas. I will say that years ago, if you had asked me what the 5 big ideas were, I probably could not spout them off to you. Today I can quite easily all the time, but I think it is important for teachers to truly be able to know them and own them, because we need to make sure we're teaching all of them every day. And if we don't own and know what they are, sometimes we may be slighting one and not addressing it. And then how are we reaching all of our students? Skills should be taught from easiest to more difficult. So looking at your scope and sequence of instruction to make sure we start with the easier ones and on up. And where that speaks, we'll talk about it with phonics in a little bit, but making sure that we address the easier ones and build up. Not that I'm going to teach the alphabet starting A to Z. We want to look very closely at what are the easiest, and reading is a speech to print language. So we need to connect those sounds with the letters. High frequency skills are taught before low frequency. So an example for this that I share is thinking about the fact that we frequently teach consonant, vowel, consonant syllables first, or short vowel syllables first, because they're the most frequent syllable type found in the English language. So that is the first type of syllable we're going to teach because they're going to encounter that the most. And then you slowly teach different syllable types, but by the frequency of which they encounter them. Prerequisite skills should be taught first to help build upon that. And similar skills may need to be separated. An example for this would be thinking about if we're teaching long A, and we have A, consonant, magic E, syllable type, we would teach that. But I'm not going to want to teach the next week long A spelled AI, because that's going to confuse them. If it's the first time I'm instructing it, I need to space that out so that they get some more practice regularly with that vowel consonant E before I introduce a new pattern that makes the same sound. We've got to get that automaticity for them first. And breaking down complex skills and strategies into smaller chunks. So just making sure that we're scaffolding and thinking very clearly about how we break those things down. This next piece is a visual that I pulled from International Dyslexia Association. And it is talking about structured literacy. But when we talk about explicit, systematic, and sequential, it is a structured literacy lesson plan type setting. This description, I just think, is really helpful to understand what that means. So systematic is that logical order, but being explicit means that we are as teachers, we are leading them to that discovery of the pattern. I have to be very concise on the words that I use so that they know what the pattern is they're learning. But the classroom should not be quiet. I want an active classroom where the students are participating in that and owning that learning. So doing that with them and guiding them to that. I do it something like auditory discovery, visual discovery, and then kinesthetic discovery. But it's helping them learn what those connections are. Another piece it hits on here, which I'm just going to touch upon because yesterday I was in Columbus with the state literacy team. And one of the things we were talking about was the use in teacher-based teams of formative assessment, how we look at what assessment we're giving to check if our students are successful or how we move forward. So instead of just following a curriculum from point A to point Z, how am I looking at my kids? What are their strengths? What are their struggles? And prioritizing some of those skills. So I may need to spend more time practicing the skill. So I've introduced it. I need to do more guided practice with these students because I know that this is an area they struggle with. So we have to be diagnostic in our teaching and intentional in those choices we make to make sure that we're providing those scaffolds for them to be able to eventually do it independently. And that leads perfectly into the gradual release of responsibility. So Anita Archer is the guru of explicit instruction. She's a fantastic resource. If you ever get a chance to read her book, Explicit Instruction, or get to see her speak, it is well worth it. And the model that she talks about is the I do, we do, you do. So I do is when I'm modeling, I'm teaching that lesson, I'm being very explicit. The we do is that guided practice. This is my opportunity to see where they're at, provide them corrective feedback, reinforcing feedback, to see if I need to go back and model it again, or if I just need to continue to practice it here. And then eventually you get to the you do, where the student's gonna take this skill and be able to apply it independently. The problem that we frequently see in classrooms, and I've been very guilty of this myself, is that we frequently go from the I do to the you do. And then that's when we as teachers sometimes get really frustrated and are like, I don't understand, I've taught this to them, I don't know why they're not able to do it. Frequently the answer to that is that they need more guided practice. They need more time of that we do to help them become independent. So being intentional about that. And when Anita talks about this, she says, you may have where you're doing I do, I do, I do, we do, we do, we do, we do, we do, and then you do, you do. The other example would be that I may do, I do, I do, we do, you do. You have a winter break, you come back, I do again. So we have to come back and model it. But again, to know to do that, you have to be very diagnostic in your teaching. Okay, so those are the elements to think about when you're implementing this instruction. But the 5 big ideas are phonemic awareness, phonics, decoding or alphabetic principle, depends on how you refer to it, fluency with connected text, comprehension, and vocabulary. Now we're going to go through each one a little bit deeper. Phonemic awareness is the ability to manipulate sounds in the word. This is sometimes people say you can do this in the dark. The reason they say that is because we don't want you to connect it with letters. The second you add letters to it, it is now phonics. But you should not do this in the dark because you want to bring their attention to your mouth. They need to be looking at place and manner of articulation. The phonemic awareness is the more sophisticated of phonological awareness, which I'm going to show you a visual in a second that will help show you that more clearly. I also linked a video here. This, I'm not going to show you it right now. It's about, I want to say 3 to 4 minutes, but it's a really great video to talk about phonemic awareness and share the importance of it and what it is, so that making sure that people can differentiate between phonics and phonemic awareness. Why it's so important. So we all have struggling readers in our classroom. About 80% of your struggling readers have a deficit in phonological processing. And we know this from functional MRIs. So therefore, if we want them to become proficient and help them become readers, we must be explicitly teaching phonemic awareness. They're probably also going to need intervention with phonemic awareness. The other big one is that dyslexia, which we know is a hot button item around, is defined as a core deficit in phonological processing. Now, that's talking about your struggling readers, but phonemic awareness is helpful for not only your struggling readers, but your gifted readers and any readers in between. It helps them when they move on to more difficult words, because some will say, oh, but my kids are readers, I don't need to spend time on that. All of them can read, it's fine. Great, they can read, but one day they're going to come to more difficult words. How can they, do they know how to manipulate those sounds and work with larger chunks of words? You need to find the opportunity to do that, because sometimes we just assume that they have it because they're readers, and that's not always correct. So we need to make sure that we're intentional on that instruction. Here's the visual that I was going to share. So this is something that I originally created in 2014, but had recently revised. And I like things that are visual and have colors. So here we go. So phonological awareness, a lot of you have heard of it as the umbrella term, and it is. So there's the large bar, shows you that that's the umbrella. And then underneath that, you will see the skills as they build up. I have early, basic, and advanced. That's aligned with David Kilpatrick's work in phonemic awareness. And he has written the book, Equipped for Reading Success. And it has some assessments that help you to know where a student is falling. Do they fall in that early, basic, or advanced skills? So early are these light yellow, working from words and sentences up to syllables, onset rhyme. They get to basic when they start talking about rhyme alliteration. So if I say a word cat, what's the first sound in cat? They'd go k. All right. Then we move on. Phonemic awareness, again, it's a subset of phonological awareness, but it's the more sophisticated skills. This is when we're really getting down to the sounds in a word, isolating the sounds, blending, segmenting, and when we get very advanced, they're able to do addition, deletion, substitution, and reversals of sounds. Any questions thus far? If so, please just pipe up anytime. All right, next is phonics, and this is where we need to correspond the sound or the phoneme with the letter or grapheme and bring those two together. So this is when they start to decode words. Phonics instruction is beneficial for all socioeconomic groups. It is a skill that everyone can use. It needs to be systematic. So again, that sound syllable correspondence, going that scope and sequence from easiest to more difficult. So where I said we go from sounds to letters, we're speech to print language. We need to look intentionally at our letters and the sounds that are in them. It's an activity that I do when I do in person with Science of Reading that really helps you see the importance of starting with certain letters that are easier for kids to learn, moving to the most difficult, so that it's easier for them to start applying them into words and decoding. The greatest impact for phonics instruction is in our primary grades. So we really need to make sure that we are intentional in that instruction in K1, 2, because it builds the basis for it. And we know as we move up in the grades, in order to make up that time, if they didn't get it at the younger, it gets harder and harder. It's also helpful to have keywords or visuals or gestures to help them remember sounds or letters. You do need to scaffold and start to take some of those away as you're teaching, but they're very helpful when they're first learning to have that keyword. And then you may start to scaffold and take that away so that they're not always using it. Gestures as well are very helpful. So I see, so someone's sharing. So the challenge that I have found is with the idea that Foundations Phonics is the first layer of word recognition. So showing the video of PA being explicitly taught prior to phonics, yes. The 80% statistic is imperative for all to know. It is very imperative for all to know. And I think, as I frequently share, when I was in the classroom co-teaching in second grade, if we were low on time, I'd be like, oh, I'm just going to skip this part of the lesson on phonemic awareness. They've got that. We got to move on. Learn later that that was a mistake. Shouldn't have done that. But you don't know what you don't know sometimes. And I regret that decision, but realizing how important that was and not knowing that I should not have skipped it. So that's the importance of understanding these 5 big ideas. Oops. All right, the next one is fluency. So being able to read words effortlessly. I am really struggling with that word today. Fluency is interesting because I think a lot of you have experienced, we give a lot of assessments where we expect students to read to us, and they tend to think that the goal is read as fast as you possibly can. We have to make sure as educators that we truly define what fluency is. And number 1 is that it's accurate. Because you can read as fast as you want, but if it's not accurate, you're not going to get meaning from it. So accuracy must always come first. And then expression and rate are really important because our rate and our expression is going to shift depending on what we read. And they need to understand that your rate is not always going to be as fast as you can. It has to fluctuate depending on what you're reading. So I like to use these visuals, these or something else, some sort of visual to help define to students when I'm working with them, what is fluency? It's being accurate, reading with good expression, and the appropriate rate. Showing that visual then to reminding them, and plus during an instruction, you might be focusing a lesson on, right now we're working on expression. So we're gonna work on the way we say this. How do we, when we raise our voice or lower our voice, how do I chunk words together? So it's a great visual to reference when you're working with students. Again, I can't stress this one enough. Moving from accuracy to automaticity. That is our goal in fluency, especially in primary grades. But also looking at the word level first is where we start. So I teach a pattern, say it's short E. I'm going to then give them a word list of all short E words in the pattern that we've practiced. Okay, that's what they're going to practice over and over. So they become automatic with it and they're so accurate because every time they see it there, it's going to say eh. Then as they become fluent in that, I would give them a word list that's heterogeneous that may have some of the previous patterns they've learned as well to start mix it up and build that accuracy and automaticity with varied patterns. Then you move on to phrases, then sentences and passages. A lot of times what we do is we move from words to passages. We need to build in that progression again, that scaffolding of how we put it in chunks. And when you start with phrases, you're building in that understanding of how we phrase things together to help understand the prosody of our language. Comprehension. I bring back the simple view. Here it looks slightly different than where we had it before, but we need to remember that comprehension is the product of their automaticity and word recognition and their level of ability with language comprehension. It takes both of those to come together to achieve reading comprehension. And we move from oral to text. So reading comprehension, when our kids come into us in kindergarten, most are not reading a text, but we need to show them how we process and read a text. What is my metacognitive process to understanding a story? So when I think about students, we have a lot of students that have spent time watching TV or seeing video games. That's part of our culture today. So to them, they automatically may see almost like a movie in front of their eyes if they're conceptualizing a story. But they don't know how to go through the process of describing what they're seeing. So we need to help build that for them. How do I orally describe and say what I'm seeing inside my head? Having discussions. So one thing is our classrooms should not be quiet. We want them to be talking as much as possible. Discussion helps them to understand how we talk, how we answer different questions, and working together on understanding things. And this is very similar to fluency, how I went through that. There's fluency at the word level, moving to phrases, such like that. Same with comprehension. It starts at the word level. Do they understand the word, what it means, how to read it? Then a sentence. How do they read a sentence? Do they know what that sentence means? Paragraph, and then connected text. So that progression of skills. We want to provide experience with varied strategies. I always give this example of thinking in a dynamic co-taught classroom where you have two teachers with very different types of perspectives is fantastic, because they can show you how I think of this text this way, and this is how I came to my conclusion. But Vicky looked at it this way, and this is how she came to her conclusion, to show our kids that we think in different ways. We should. That's a wonderful thing about us. But we came to the same conclusion, but we got there in different ways. That's okay. And comprehension monitoring, how do they monitor to make sure they're understanding and cooperatively working through some strategies? Vocabulary. This is knowing what words we know in order to communicate. And again, it starts with your oral language. So the first piece is that our receptive vocabulary is always stronger than our expressive. So I can understand more words than I hear, than I am able to use them yet. So if you think about even starting and just thinking about a baby, when you're talking with babies and they're listening and they're making sounds, and sometimes they're understanding you, they react in certain ways that you know they are understanding some of what you're saying, but they can't express it yet. And then slowly they start to express it. That's what we're talking about there. But it starts a little differently. So it starts with the listening to speaking, and then we go from reading, which is a receptive because they're reading it and they're taking in those words, that vocabulary, to eventually, once they own it, they can put it in their writing. And that is our mental lexicon, our dictionary of words that we understand and are able to use. We want to be very explicit when we teach vocabulary words with students, that we're giving a student-friendly definition so that they can start to use it and get them saying the word over and over in different settings, different times, so that it becomes a word they own. Okay, so I'm going to close out that section. So we just talked about the 5 big ideas of literacy at primary. So my first question is, would anyone like to tell us, or can you guys pipe in and work together, of what are the 5 big ideas of literacy? What was the first one? Working with sounds is phonemic awareness. Yes. What's the next one? Phonics. And then we have fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary are the ones that we just went through. Now, who can tell me, and if you have a video on, I can see you if you raise your hand and I can unmute you for you, why these are important. You're raising your hand? Go ahead.
They build upon one another. It's a sequential process. You have to have one in order to move to the next, onto the next.
Yeah. And they work together to make a fluent reader, right? We have to work on all those pieces because, like we said in the simple view, you have to have the word recognition and language comprehension in order to have reading comprehension. So we have to have all those pieces there in our instruction. Any questions on this half so far? Okay. Now we're going to go into the 5 big ideas of adolescent literacy. And these come from MyBlissy, which is a Michigan organization in education. And MyBlissy has been building in the science of reading in their districts for quite a few years longer than us in Ohio. So we're We refer to them on a lot of pieces to help us build our systems here. Yes, thanks, Vicki, for putting that on there so you guys know what Biblicity is. So when we refer to the 5 big ideas of adolescent literacy, they're very similar to the other 5 big ideas, but they shift slightly. So the first part is advanced word study or advanced word work. And then fluency with connected text, which we already talked about some. Comprehension again, vocabulary, and then the big one, motivation. So how do we wrap in that motivation into all these areas? So how do we maximize instruction at the adolescent level? So the big thing is that it's a shift in the way we're teaching at that point. You have to have behavior management and make sure that you're using your instructional time to the best as possible to keep them engaged. So another Anita Archerism is the perky pace. So making sure, and this is also important at that primary range, how do we keep a perky pace? So don't spend like an hour on one skill. We need to move from one thing to the next, keep the kids engaged, keep them talking. And that helps, it also helps eliminate behavior issues because we're engaged and we're moving and we're consistent and we have routines that they can follow. Frequent opportunities for feedback. So that is where if you're doing that gradual release of responsibility and you have that guided practice time, that is a great time to give specific feedback. And obviously you can't give it to every student all the time, but if you make it a priority to give it to a few people every time you're at that, you're going to get to more students quickly. Opportunities for practice and review skills, that relates to what I just said. Behavioral routines are really important to keeping that, that behavior management linking with your instruction. Clear expectations. And throughout that, I would also say it's very important to have that relationship with your students to understand what their needs are to help promote the correct behavior for them. And we'll talk more of that in a little bit. Efficient transitions. So Mel Riddle is a big one that we talk about with adolescent literacy. And he talks about working from bell to bell. We know that in a lot of middle school, high schools, we have schedules where you may have some like random, like I said, you may have like 41 minutes to teach. How am I going to make sure I can use that full 41 minutes? What do we do to engage them as soon as they walk in the door and keep us engaged until the second they leave that classroom? Being very intentional about that so that you're maximizing your learning time. Advanced word study, what it looks like at adolescent, is identifying breaking words into syllable types. So we are teaching more frequently at the primary grades, the syllable types. The problem is we need to connect that up into our middle and upper grades. They need to understand the syllable types and how to use them so that they can break apart multisyllabic words. So making sure we understand those and continue to support the understanding of syllable types is integral. Recognizing the irregular parts of words that don't follow the patterns we're used to, and applying the meaning of prefixes, suffixes, root words. So this is a big one. That's morphology, the meaningful parts of words. Huge impact the middle and upper grades across content areas. We are all literacy teachers, including gym, art, music. If they go to wood shop, I mean, everybody is a literacy teacher because literacy, there's the literacy within our subject area. Like I say, if somebody give me a science text, I'm not going to read it like I read a story on my Kindle when I'm going to bed at night, you know? I have to stop. I have to slow down. I have to reread. I have to look at some of the graphics or tables to help me understand what I'm reading. By modeling that and discussing that with students in a science class, I'm teaching them what fluency, what literacy is in that context. See a question there. Do you have a favorite resource for teaching advanced phonics? We use Haggerty and really great reading for our younger students and have just started to assess our older kiddos using Kilpatrick's Past. So you're asking as far as looking at phonemic awareness, I'm guessing there, because you cited Haggerty and really great reading. Kilpatrick's Past. If I'm looking at my older students, what I would use is using David Kilpatrick's book, Equipped for Reading Success. So with my older students that are still struggling with those PA skills, he has in that text, he has 1-minute drills. So your past aligns with where they fall within that progression of skills. So in PA earlier, where I said there was early, basic, advanced, we would be looking at where they fell, and that's where instruction would start. And they have really quick, easy activities that are scripted that you can use, no problem. Did that answer that question? But you said advanced phonics. So looking at advanced phonics, I look at a lot of strategies, which we're going to talk about in just a second. So let me show you this next part and see if it answers your question. This is one visual that most people find very helpful. So I try to share it with you guys. So if you've heard of Language Essentials, I see we have a question, just a second. I'm going to show this and then I'll go back to it. Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling, or the acronym is LETTERS, which people who are part of the pilot project in the state of Ohio have participated in this professional development. We also have other districts that are starting to do this professional development with their teachers. But this visual is beautiful because you can see what that word work looks like as we progress from K through high school. And when we're talking about that advanced word work, we are talking about grades 4. So we look here, grade 4, your focus is on common syllables, syllabification, and then morphology, the Anglo-Saxon, Latin roots, prefixes, suffixes. And then we start to add in the Greek-derived morphemes and how those work together to build words. So this kind of helps you see what that progression of those advanced word work as we move through the years. Now, advanced word study, we need to be looking at syllable types, syllabification to attack multisyllable words, which you talked about, etymology, word origins. I always like to share with this one. I don't know how many of you have ever watched a spelling bee, but whenever I watched them, I was like, I don't know why anybody's asking where this word came from, nor do I know how that is possibly helping them because I don't have a clue. Now that I'm learning more and progressing, I'm learning a lot more about it to feel more confident in it. I understand that when we refer to, so if I said, oh, this word is French in origin. Okay, I know if it has the sound sh, that it's spelled with a CH, like chef, chauffeur, chandelier. But if the word is Greek origin, k would be spelled CH, like in choir, chorus. It also helps to understand that etymology because we have certain words, a lot of our Greek words, or a lot of our scientific words are from Greek descent. So it's helpful to understand that as well. Morphology, meaningful parts. When I work with teacher in middle and upper grades, I talk about the importance and the use of a morpheme wall. So having the different roots that you've discussed on there and different prefixes and suffixes so they can start to see how words can build together at those different layers. This is very helpful when they get to things like the ACT, SAT. And I said I was going to hit back on, it's coming, of a resource to look at for strategies. So hold that thought. Fluency is, again, their ability to effortlessly read words. I cannot say that today. Building with accuracy, automaticity, rate, and expression. So looking at that, but it's different how we approach fluency in the adolescent years. So we're still talking about oral to independent reading, because here we're talking about across content areas and that gradual release of responsibility. So again, it's great for me to go up and read. So if I can model in my art class how I'm going to read an article about some art piece, how do I read it? Well, how do I go back and ask questions about it? As opposed to when I'm in my social studies class, how do I read this text to get information from it? How does the cadence of which I read change? My speed, thinking about that, and we model it first orally, and then we start to have them doing it and asking questions to provide that feedback to make sure that they're reading the text in a way that's fluent for that content area. Comprehension, the next one. Again, it's the product of word recognition and language comprehension. So we need to understand what that looks like in these pieces that we've been talking about, how they layer into word recognition and language comprehension at the adolescent level to make sure we're supporting students in those skills in order to get the product of reading comprehension. Here we go. This is the part I was talking about with strategies. So teaching evidence-based strategies is the best way to get them to success in literacy across the content area. A great resource, and it's what I use to frame out most any of my professional developments, are the IES practice guides available on What Works Clearinghouse. They are long documents, not gonna lie, but they have a plethora of different ones. So today for this section, I look at things from adolescent literacy, and they have what are the most effective strategies to use. And it will align with the 5 big ideas we just talked about, aligns with the IES practice guides, what they identify. They give you examples of some of the strategies that you would use to teach that within any content area. They have everything from adolescent literacy, foundational literacy, math, supporting English learners. So there's a lot of practice guides there. Great resource, just know that they're long. So if you print them, be cautious where you're printing them because some of them are like 100 pages. Oh yes, there is that.
Those came from the list.
Yes. Can you screenshot that and send that?
Just wanna
Sorry.
make sure.
Miss Vicki was just showing me the one thing we talked about not long ago of a progression of some different curricular tools that can help with phonics to answer that question you were saying. So we're gonna share that out in just a minute. Planning clearly the before, during, and after reading activities to make sure we're engaging in the discussion and comprehension. And again, keep in mind that gradual release of responsibility. I know I keep harking on it, but that's because again, we frequently go from I do to expecting the students to do it. We've got to make sure we have that we do in between there to support them. Vocabulary. When we talk about vocabulary, I feel like I skipped a slide. I did. Again, vocabulary is that being able to communicate effectively and understanding words to help us with reading, writing, listening, speaking. At the adolescent level, we have 2 major approaches to getting them there. One is direct instruction and word meaning, which can be done with explicit vocabulary routines and semantic maps. I'm not going into depth in those strategies today. I'm just sharing with you the instructional, the ones that are the most effective. And then we want to promote independent vocabulary acquisition. So to get there, we have to teach them certain things like how to analyze semantics, syntax, context clues to derive meaning. But we need to make sure that they're automatic in their word recognition in order to start applying some of those skills. So how do you layer that together? Because you have to have all of that in order to be able to comprehend your text. So motivation. It's really important, especially when we get in those middle upper grades. It helps us to know their probability of success. We need to keep them motivated. If they're not motivated, they're usually not as successful. We're going to watch a quick video here, and then at the end, I'm going to ask you a question with it.
And we were doing like where everybody else, we had to go in a circle to read, like, and all that. And I had a straw. I got some paper and got a spit wad, and I threw a spit wad at the teacher. Got in trouble, and I was like, I don't have to read no more. I'm like, good, yay. I didn't have to read no more.
I should like slump down in my seat or something where they couldn't see me, or like if they wanted me to read, I'd pretend like I'm trying to figure out a question or something. That way they wouldn't pick me or anything. And yeah, it's pretty much what I've been doing for as long as I know.
Go to the bathroom, dug my head down, just make it look like I wasn't paying attention so they wouldn't call on me.
If almost my turn to read, I'll ask who's the restroom and wait until it was done and then come back in. And one time, I was about to get an award for helping out some kids. And then they wanted me to read off my kid's name and everything, because I didn't remember what their name was. So I had left it to the restroom and went till the whole thing was over.
And I'd act like I was asleep so they couldn't call on me. Or if they did call on me, I'd wake up and say I can't read and go back to sleep and refuse to.
I'd make a scene not to do it. They would. I'd just act out, sleep, just wouldn't get up, just wouldn't ignore the teachers, just wouldn't talk, just rebel. Only thing I could do, I was just embarrassed. And wouldn't get up there and tried and fell at a word and hear everybody laugh.
So that is from Children of the Code, is where that video comes from. All right. Now, during that, I'm going to go on this discussion in just a second, but I know, Vicki, did you just share out the?
I'm working. Yep. Yep.
Oh, shoot. Pushed the wrong button. Excuse me. Sorry. Okay. So after that video, could you share something that was either confirmed of your beliefs, shocked you, or raised some more questions? Any thoughts? Do you want me to unmute you? Yeah, go ahead. I unmuted you.
Thanks. I don't know. I guess their age was shocking that, you know, I teach fourth grade, so you see it in fourth grade, but I don't know why. Just my experience has always been at this level, but I guess if they're struggling here and they don't get what they need, it's just going to continue. So
Yeah.
that they had that as young men was shocking.
Yeah. The young men feeling that way.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? The students who are reading difficulties may show it through behavior. Yes. Someone also said, it always amazes me how articulate the students are in explaining the defense mechanisms they use to avoid reading. So true. The other piece to it that we've been talking about with some groups is knowing like what's the chicken and what's the egg is kind of how I refer to it. Like, is their behavior a cause? Is their behavior because they're struggling with academics, or is their behavior causing them to struggle with academics? And we really have to know which is which so that we're providing the right support to those students. And being really aware of it. Like if we know that they're doing those behaviors to avoid doing work, we need to find a way to get them to access that work and still participate. But it may not be like, don't make them read aloud. Like, you don't put them in that position to feel so uncomfortable that they're going to act out and they're going to leave. It always makes me sad in that video when I see the one where the kid's about to get an award and he went to the bathroom to avoid it because he was going to have to read words. Like, what a shame. You know, that could be avoided if we know the student well enough. The elements of motivation, working on that self-monitoring, interest, finding ways to tap into their interest and know their interests, find a way to engage in that. Types of motivation, we have intrinsic and extrinsic. So we really have to think about that. And this really comes back to, again, building those relationships with our students. That relationship is going to help them feel more motivated and engaged to want to work with you. It goes a long way. So how literacy is taught at secondary, we've moved away from literacy blocks and we're looking more at reading instruction across the content areas. This is where we again want to use those evidence-based strategies and make sure that we're using them in different content areas. So I have gone into a lot of districts and talked about explicit vocabulary instruction and how we can use those strategies in all subject areas. So how do I do that and what does it look like when I do it in science? And how can I do that in music? So that we're all helping build that vocabulary. The other really important piece with that is making sure you're using those words across subject areas, because you don't want them to think, oh, this is only a math word. I will only ever use this word in math, nowhere else. If we limit them, they're not going to see how broad our words can go to meaning in other places. This is a visual that comes from the IES practice guides I mentioned. So this is the adolescent literacy one. And this is how it starts at the beginning of most of the documents. You'll find one of these. These are the recommendations. Notice it has 5 recommendations. It's so funny. I'm pointing with my finger like you guys can see me. There's 5 recommendations. If you look at these, they align with the 5 big ideas of adolescent literacy. They also have the level of evidence, strong or moderate. And then throughout the document, they'll break down what are some of the strategies that we can use within these 5 recommendations. It's a great tool, great resource to start from and developing what your plan would be to make sure you're using evidence-based strategies. All right, we are coming to the end, and just in the nick of time. I'm sorry I kept you slightly over. Who would like to share what the 5 big ideas of adolescent literacy are? Oops, I see somebody had a question and I.
Nope, I threw in another.
Oh, okay.
The last of those resources, I apologize.
Okay. So would anyone like to share 5 big ideas of adolescent literacy? Give it a try. I'll help you if you're stuck. Don't worry. I might just unmute you all. I'm going to unmute you all here. Oh, I hear the baby. That must be Brittany.
That's me, sorry.
You're fine. Any 5 big ideas of adolescent literacy?
Advanced word study.
Advanced word study, yep.
Comprehension, motivation.
Comprehension, motivation.
Fluency.
Fluency.
Vocabulary.
Vocabulary, woohoo! So making sure we're weaving those into our instruction across content areas is very important. Morphology across the content areas, very impactful. We see how the words work and create more words. I have work cited here at the end. I've cited some throughout the PowerPoint. And then at the end, I have my contact information. So if you need anything, you can email me. If you look in the chat box now, I'm trying to go back up there, you will see some different resources that Vicki threw in there for you guys. I now see a comment that threw in there too, where you said all roads lead back to relationships. Yes. So true. Those relationships make a big difference. I think that that's always, you know, in it. I think when you have those strong relationships, you have a happier classroom too, happier teachers, happier kids. So any other questions, comments, concerns?